Hello, my name is Leah. I'm here at Christian Missionary Fellowship International, or CMF, where our mission is to create dynamic, Christ-centered communities that transform the world. We are a missionary sending organization. You can see some of our missionaries here behind us, some of whom you are partnered with. We are so excited that you're including us in your Serve Day. We're going to be painting together, painting some of our spaces like this one that we use daily, but haven't been painted in a really long time and desperately need a facelift. So thank you for including us in Serve Day. Thank you for your partnership with our missionaries, and we are looking forward to painting together.
Hi Venture Church, I'm Brooke Howe and I'm with the Cooper House, and we are so excited to have a group of you come out on September 29th for a service project. We are an organization that serves families and children who are involved in the Department of Child Services, families and children who are in crisis, and this home that you see here behind us, that's where we run most of our programming out of. And so on September 29th, we are going to do some landscaping and trimming of bushes to help keep the house looking nice and just hospitable for the families and children that we serve. So you guys will be such a huge blessing. We cannot wait to have you out, and we just thank you so very much for partnering with us to foster hope for families and children in our community.
All right, Venture, I am so excited about next Sunday. Venture out, it's going to be incredible. If you've signed up, show up. If you haven't signed up yet, come on, what's wrong with you? Get on the train. It's getting ready to leave the station. We want you to be a part of this. You do not want to miss out on this. It's going to be incredible. Also, I don't know if we've explicitly said this yet, but wear those t-shirts. We're going to be a small army of folks out serving in our community. Wear those t-shirts. They are designed to get dirty. It's going to be awesome. All right. Welcome to week 3 of our Life on Loan series. We've been doing this for 2 reasons. One, to gear up for next Sunday. Let's make sure we prepare our hearts and our minds well to go out and serve our community well. But more than that, next Sunday is designed simply to be a taste of serving. What God wants from you, what He wants from me, what God desires for all of us, well, is to live our lives on loan. We've been looking at this verse each week. Your life is not your own. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 19 and 20. You were bought at a price. The price is high. It's King Jesus. We just celebrated that moment in communion. Your life is not your own. The question is, which life? That's probably the wrong way to say that. You know, you have 2 lives, Rather, you have one long life. You have a really short one this side of death, and a really long eternal life the other side of your death. And spoiler alert, we're all going to die. This is investing well for the long haul. Not just for you, but to bring as many people with you as you can. I got to visit some cool places a few weeks ago. I was with my dad and my brothers. We went over to England to visit my aunt is a retired missionary. She's lived there for a long time. My dad had never visited, so we went over to check that out. We're road tripping from London, where we flew in, to Birmingham, where my aunt lives. We needed gas. We stopped over at this little town. Maybe you have heard of it, Oxford. Not a bad place to stop for like a Milky Way and a coffee, right? Fill up the gas tank to keep going. Oxford. We walked around Oxford. I realized we were just spitting distance from the church, the grave, the house, one of my favorite authors. In my opinion, one of the greatest authors of the 20th century, has had a profound impact on my own life. His name is C.S. Lewis. If your name was Clive Staples, you would go by C.S. as well. So here we are, right next to the church, next to his house, and so we stopped over. I snapped the obligatory pictures. Check this out. This is the church, walking distance from his house, where he worshiped. That's his grave. He's buried in the church cemetery. His body is. That time, that small, short piece of his life before he died, and then was physically buried there. Of course, he's alive in Christ, living out his eternity in heaven. But this is the pew that he would sit in. And I just wondered as I sat there, how many of his books that I've fallen in love with, Mere Christianity, The Chronicles of Narnia, oh my goodness, The Great Divorce, there are so many. I can't name them all. How many of those got worked out sitting right there in that space? And then I bet there were occasional times when he was invited to speak something. Yeah, he'd come up, and I bet he would stand right there at that space. Okay, so from there, we went over to his house. They call it the kilns. Why do they call it the kilns? Well, because it used to be a factory to make bricks. Clay-lined bricks. They dug up this space. It got filled in with a pond. My brother snapped a picture of me sitting there on a bench that looked ancient. I'm quite sure that C.S. Lewis would have sat on that bench. This is on his property, looking out at his own pond. And I just couldn't help but think, how many times did he sit there and work out something that ended up in one of his books? So many quotes were rolling through my brain. One of them, I think, has big application to this concept of life on loan. Again, this little piece of my life gearing me up for this piece of my life. This is from Mere Christianity. He said this, the Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. I couldn't help but think about that as I sat there. There were ducks on that pond, and I bet there were in his day and age as well. Men find sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. And if that is so, look at this. I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, this short little space, this life on loan, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others do the same. You have one life to live. Your life is on loan from God. How are you investing it? While we were there, we visited a cool location. I was telling our new neighbor, we just moved not long ago, and the neighbor lives across the street. He grew up in England. I learned this the other day when his son, cute little guy, wearing a Cub Scout uniform, showed up at our door, wanted to sell us some popcorn. Of course, we bought some popcorn. We stand out front. We're having a conversation, and he was like, "Oh, you Americans, you're so cute with your history." You know, Conner Prairie, we are celebrating ancient history from the 1820s over there, right? I mean, it's a living history museum. I'm not knocking it. I love that place. I think it's incredible. While we were over in England, we visited a place, and he and I talked about this. It's called Warwick Castle. It's a living history museum for them. The difference is it was built by William the Conqueror in 1060-something. How cool is that? It's like 1,000 years old. He was kind of giggling at our sense of history. I'm standing on top of Warwick Castle and I'm looking out at this scene. It's a living history museum. There were knights jousting out there, kind of a cool thing to listen in on and watch. Over here, this reminds me of our life on loan. It's a trebuchet. I think that's a French word. It's leaning on a principle that goes way back to 287 BC, Archimedes. Maybe you remember this name from physics or geometry class. He was a mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, and he used his inventions of pulleys and catapults to help the Greeks win at war. And he used his equation for finding the radius of a sphere to stump geometry students throughout the ages, including me. He was credited as saying this: "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." He understood the power of leverage. How something relatively small, a lever and a fulcrum point, can be used to move something very, very large. He understood that if a lever is long enough and the fulcrum is strong enough, the rest is just a matter of physics. A lever. Leverage. A lever, hear me, is an opportunity. We're talking about opportunities today. That's the title of this message. Your life on loan is filled with opportunities. We talked last week about intersections. Intersections can be opportunities if we recognize the power of leverage. A life on loan. By the way, a loan is leverage. A car loan is leverage for transportation. A house loan is leverage for a safe place for me to lay my head. An IOU to my kid is leverage for never paying them their allowance. Here's the question. Are you leveraging your life on loan for the opportunities of kingdom expansion? Are you doing this? Are you leveraging the opportunities that God gives you? I love this quote. This is such a cool quote. "Life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather it's designed to be a skid in sideways, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, 'Wow, what a ride.'" Do you see the opportunities that God gives you as leverage to advance His kingdom? A life on loan recognizes at least two types of levers. If you're taking notes today, write both of these down. Here's the first one. Leverage you. What you have to offer is a lever that God can use in big ways and small ways for His kingdom advancement. Your life on loan is a lever. Leverage yourself. Let me ask this question. Do you believe you're a good neighbor? I told you, we just met some of our new neighbors the other day. I'm not just talking about the people who live right around you, but everybody you bump into, who you rub shoulders with in life. Are you a good neighbor? This is a question of biblical proportion. Some of you know exactly where I'm going with this. If you open up your Bibles to Luke chapter 10, let's look beginning at verse 29. There's this moment when a know-it-all walks up to Jesus. He asks a question. It has to do with being a good neighbor. Well, let's look at it. He wanted to justify himself. Boy, I can't wait to see where this goes. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus tells a story. You probably know it as the story of the Good Samaritan. And he's making a point here. Check this out. Getting out of your own way is difficult. As you think about your life on loan, your life is a lever for kingdom advancement. Getting out of your own way is difficult, and going out of your own way is even more difficult. And he tells this story. Well, let's read it together. Verse 29. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho." By the way, he was going northeast. Going down? Yeah, literally going downhill. When he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. The victim of the story was beaten up, robbed of his stuff, left for dead on the side of the road. Some people saw him, but they passed on by. But one person stopped to help him. Man, I don't know if I just swallowed a bug, but something's not right there. In characteristic fashion, Jesus threw a twist into the story. The good guy in the story was a Samaritan. Jesus was telling the story to a Jewish man, and more than likely he was in front of a Jewish audience. Jews and Samaritans had kind of been at each other's throats. They had this long-standing feud for a long time now. They took great pains to avoid one another. The first guy to approach this beaten, left for dead, naked man lying on the side of the road was a priest, one of the religious leaders of the day. They're the guys who they thought they had the market for God cornered themselves. What did the priest do? When he saw the man, he crossed the street, then he kept right on going. The second man to see the beaten fellow was a teacher of the law, an expert. He kept going on his merry way. There was a time when I would hear this story and I would judge. How selfish, how unloving. That's unconscionable. Not to stop and help somebody that was in such profound need, but the truth is, maybe I would have been like one of those guys who passed by. Maybe they planned on sending help back. Maybe they were concerned about getting mugged themselves. It's possible that this guy was just lying in wait to harm them as well, and they were concerned for their own safety. Maybe they prayed. Maybe they had important meetings to get to, probably did. It's possible that they were on their way to do some good things, maybe even better things. All Jesus shared with his listeners was that these two, the priest and the law expert, they didn't stop. Jesus says a third man, a Samaritan, well, he stopped to help. He saw a need, and he stopped and met that need. Are you a good neighbor? It's simple, and it's thoughtful, and maybe it's profound. He could have crossed the street. He could have ignored the problem. He could have gone on his way, but he didn't. He got off of his donkey, and he helped the man. Now, it's possible that this Samaritan was just a good doer, or a do-gooder, rather. Or maybe he was looking for the half-dead people lying on the side of the road agency. Maybe he belonged to that group, and he was just doing his job. But it's more likely that he had an agenda. He also had a full plate. He had things to do. He had people to see. It's not likely that this Samaritan woke up one morning and said, I sure hope I can find somebody lying naked, half dead, next to the road, and I can stop to help them. That would really make my day. Martin Luther King Jr. made, I think, a profound observation about this guy, this story. He said, the first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? Self-preservation. But the Good Samaritan reversed the question, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? Selfish versus selfless. This is one of those types of intersections. We talked about intersections last week. God sends our way where if we're paying attention, we might see an opportunity right here in front of us. The Samaritan found himself at one of those moments in life when a life on loan, your life is on loan from God, makes a difference. The truth is, we often find our way around these moments. Maybe we have an opportunity to help. We could stop and get off our donkey, but we find a way around it. Your intersections might not involve an accident on a roadway. In fact, they probably will involve the people that are right around you. It could be a person that looks discouraged, but you don't stop to encourage her. It could be a friend who calls you up and you sense something in his voice, but you don't ask the good follow-up question. Maybe it's a coworker who's struggling. Maybe it's the neighbor that you ignore, the stranger that you encounter, your family or your community that has needs. It could be somebody next Sunday. We roll up our sleeves, we put on our t-shirts, we go out to serve, and somebody wanders onto your job site. Oh my goodness. Don't be so busy next Sunday with tasks that you miss the person that God puts right in front of you. I mean, it isn't that we don't care or we aren't good-hearted. Sometimes we're just too busy, too task-oriented to miss the person. We have schedules, we have plans, we have agendas, and we have kids to chase, and getting out of our own way is difficult, and going out of our own way, what do we say, is even more difficult. So how? How did the Samaritan in this story that Jesus is telling, how did he become known as a good neighbor? Well, it's simple. He recognized a need, he got off of his donkey, and he took the time to meet the need. This is what it looks like to be a good neighbor, to leverage your life on loan for kingdom advancement for God. There's several ways that he did this. First of all, you'll notice he got his hands dirty. Sometimes we don't, right? Well, how did he do it? Look, he went to him, the text says, and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. The Samaritan cleaned up the man. He bandaged his wounds. The guy got his hands dirty. He wasn't just standing on the side of the road calling 911 from his cell phone. He got in there. He rolled up his sleeves. He got his hands dirty. Next week, as you serve, don't be afraid of a little bit of elbow grease. Don't be afraid to get yourself dirty for Jesus, to advance his kingdom purposes. Serving, it's okay to get your hands dirty. By the way, the following week, as you live out your life on loan, there is no task that's beneath you. Serving oftentimes requires we get our hands dirty. Here's another one. He was inconvenienced. This was not a convenient stopover in his day. What did the text say? Then he put the man on his own donkey. Now, this Samaritan had been paying the feed bill and the water bill or whatever else had to happen to maintain a donkey. Why do you have that? Well, it's transportation. He had the donkey for him to ride it. Now he put the dude on his means of transportation. Next week, as you serve, don't worry about being inconvenienced. I mean, there's so many things that we can gripe about, right? It's too hot, it's too cold, my project is too far away, it's too, I don't know. What is it? It's human nature that we tend to, well, I'm inconvenienced by this. It's okay, that's what serving is. We roll up our sleeves, we get our hands dirty. We're not afraid to be inconvenienced, not just next Sunday as we serve, but the next week as you live your life on loan. How about this one? He provided lodging and companionship. He met his needs, and then he went the extra mile. What's the text say? He took him to an inn and took care of him. He hung out with the guy for a while. He made sure not just his physical needs, but his emotional needs were cared for as well. This next week as you serve, don't be afraid to go the extra mile. The following week, as you live your life on loan, what is it that God would call you to do that's going the extra mile in serving? Here's one. He provided money. This isn't always the first answer. Sometimes it's awfully easy to write a check, but sometimes serving actually does require an investment of money. He provided money. Look at this. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins, this is a lot of money, and gave them to the innkeeper. Looking after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. His pocketbook was under the lordship of Jesus. His pocketbook was living a life on loan. Next week, as you serve, what's it going to cost? The following week, as you live your life on loan, what's it going to cost? Are you willing to leverage yourself. Remember I said there are two principles here for leverage. Leverage yourself, but also don't be afraid to leverage your resources. That might be money. It might be other things as well. Remember Archimedes? He understood the power of the lever. Moving something relatively small or a small thing, a lever and a fulcrum could be used to move something much bigger. It's just a matter of physics. Unfortunately, Archimedes had this idea of moving the world. There was no such lever and there was no such fulcrum. But that doesn't diminish the power of leverage. Small things that you do can make a huge difference. We're familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan, likely. We're probably also likely familiar with the 23rd Psalm. We quoted at funerals and things like that. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. Green pastures, quiet waters, deep abiding peace. It's the next verse. The first verse of Psalm 24, we discover David's secret. Look at this. He says this, the earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it. This is why David found peace. He had figured out what few people discover. All of it already belongs to God. My life is on loan from God. It was bought with a price. Jesus on the cross. It's His. We're called to hold things loosely. Everything here is all-inclusive. All includes everybody. This means that even though you feel like you're the owner of your resources, it's really God who's the owner. What's that make you? A steward, a manager, even of your life that's on loan from God. Joy, a bit earlier, when she was bridging from communion to offering, she referenced the story of Mark chapter 12. This poor widow woman who viewed herself as a lever, a stewarding God's resources, the paltry resources that God had given her. Let's read that together, shall we? I'm in Mark chapter 12, verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this poor woman has put in more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, she put in everything, all she had to live on. Though her resources were few, get this, she leveraged what she had by putting everything into God's hands. Hear me. Sometimes your greatest leverage begins simply with wanting to accomplish something more. Sometimes it just begins with your heart. Your desire. We looked at the parable of the talents a couple of weeks ago when we launched this series. We talked about big resources and little resources. Let me remind you how this story begins. Jesus tells the story in Matthew chapter 25, and he said this, again, it would be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, it got doubled to 10. To another, 2 bags of gold, it got doubled to 4. And to another, 1 bag, each according to his ability. And that dude dug a hole and buried his treasure. He didn't leverage it. He didn't use it as an opportunity, his life on loan to expand God's kingdom. Well, why was that a failure? What is it about that where this 1 talent man failed? There's a few ways. Here's one. He thought that easier was better. Easier is not always better. He wanted to keep the money safe, and he thought, well, it will be if I go into the backyard and dig a hole and bury the treasure. Can you imagine this scene if you look out into your neighbor's yard and you catch him going from his garage with a shovel and digging a hole in the ground and what in the world is going on in the neighbor's yard? He probably thought that, hey, I'm going to keep it safe. This is the easy route. But is it really? Is it really easier? Now he's going to have to get a guard dog and a motion detector for his backyard, right? He's going to have to go out and purchase a metal detector so he can go out every morning and make sure that the money is still there in the hole. He probably woke up to the slightest of noises to see who might be stealing this buried treasure. Maybe he found out that it was a whole lot more work to keep his talent safe than it would have been to risk a little and to invest it into God's kingdom expansion. It's leverage. Listen, easier isn't always better. Don't bury your talent in some misguided attempt at peace. Rather, leverage it. Invest your talent. Invest your life on loan. It's meant to be leveraged for kingdom advancement. Here's another thing, another possibility. Maybe he was just good old-fashioned lazy. Sometimes we just say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate. I'm going to sit this one out. Laziness. How about this one? He played it too safe. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Jesus does call us to a good measure of risk to advance his kingdom, to take a risk, to step out. Let's put it in Christian terms, to step out in faith. At the end of that story, we see, the ramifications of not doing that. That lazy man who is playing it safe, he gets cast out of the king's presence. Look at this, to a space of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know about you, but that feels riskier to me than taking good and healthy measured risk today. My life is on loan from God. He wants me to leverage it, even to risk a little for his kingdom advancement. Remember that quote? Life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body. Rather to skid in sideways, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and proclaiming, wow, what a ride. Have you risked enough for Jesus? Do you see that as a lever for kingdom advancement? Here's the point of the story. The implication of Jesus' story of the one-talent man is that we have each been given something of value. And there is an expectation that it will be used for good and that someday the master will show up and he's going to ask you, he's going to ask me to give an accounting. What did you risk for kingdom expansion? What is the leverage that you utilized your life on loan to push kingdom expansion forward? Maybe you haven't been willing to make the most of your resources. Maybe you felt unable in some ways. Maybe you didn't realize that you had resources. It doesn't matter. Your story isn't over yet. You can begin to do that today. God is the God of second and third and 100,000 chances. God can use your talent, your opportunity to serve, to advance his kingdom and to push his kingdom purposes forward. Years ago, I took a bunch of students for a week-long discipleship experience. We were on a college campus in Kentucky. This is back in the days of the World Series of Poker. Do you remember these days? So this youth pastor took the boys back to the dorm, and at night they wanted to learn how to play Texas Hold'em. Yeah, that's what we did. Discipleship, right? There's this moment, if you've ever played Texas Hold'em, I love this image. You go all in. You push all of your chips, you risk a little, and push all of your chips to the center of the table. It's a make or break moment. I'm going all in. The widow in that story that we just read, she tossed in her last coins and she claimed, I'm all in. The feeding of the 5,000, maybe you remember that story. The boy shoved his bread and fish to the center and said, I'm all in. Mother Teresa, let's grab a more contemporary illustration. You've heard of her. She pushed all of her chips to the center of the table, her life on loan, and said, I'm all in. By the way, don't make this too grandiose. She served, rescued off of the streets of Calcutta thousands of people that needed her to be the hands and feet of Jesus. But it begins not with thousands. It begins with a first step. This is what one writer says of Mother Teresa. If she hadn't picked up the first person many years ago, the 77,500 plus wouldn't have been picked up off of the streets. Have you pushed your life from your side of the table into the center, into God's hands and said, I'm all in. My life is on loan from God. I'm all in. Invest what you have. This is leverage. Invest your time. Invest your body. Invest your money. Oh my goodness, last week, if you were here last week, we interviewed Bobby John from Reach India up here on the platform. And there was a moment I felt just a little bit of, I hope it was healthy, pride. We've been doing this New Life initiative over the last year. I'm invested in what he's doing. Some of what I'm giving, Dawn and I are giving to New Life, some of that is going to Reach India. And as he told stories about Save the Girl, I couldn't help but, I'm invested in that. I want to hear more. What is God doing, kingdom expansion, with my investment? Invest what you have. This is leverage. Invest not just your money, invest your possessions. Your life is on loan from God. What do we say? Let's end where we began. You're not your own. Your life is not yours. You were bought at a price. The text goes on to say, therefore, honor God with your bodies. Honor God with your time. Honor God, your life on loan with your money, with your possessions. I can't wait for next Sunday. We're going to go out and serve our community. I can't wait to hear the stories of what God does in us and through us. We're going to respond to this message with worship. As the worship team comes out, I want to pray over this week as we gear up for what God's going to do in us and through us next Sunday. I want to leave you with a parting thought. I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem a few times now. I love that place. In my opinion, we're talking about the location of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection. In the 4th century, Helena, Constantine's mom, did the research, came, and they started building a church on that space. It's ancient. The building is ancient. Some of it goes back to that time. You talk about a living history museum. I took a picture a few years ago. This is the courtyard outside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I want to punch in on a couple of spaces in this picture. There's a ladder leaning up against the wall up here. And there are some columns over here where crosses are carved into the columns. Crosses carved, ladder leaning. To me, this is symbolic of the ways, if we're not careful, we can mess this up. A church is not a living history museum. A church is a place of worship. It's a place to connect me with the Creator God of the universe and to connect everyone outside the walls of the church, as many as we can bring along as possible, to Him as well. Here's the problem. Sometimes we get in God's way. This ladder is symbolic of that to me. It has been leaning there since the 80s. Why? Well, you've heard of churches that divide because they can't agree on picking the color of the carpet or something silly like that. There are 6 different churches that administer this space, and they got in a fight. And they couldn't agree on who's going to move the ladder, and it became some kind of a political truce. It's been leaning there for like 140 years. That's ridiculous. Church, hear me. We will be the type of church that rolls up our sleeves and goes out and serves a world that is dying to see Jesus in us and through us. Let's not get in His way. Here's a way we can do this. Get in His way. These marble columns that I referenced. To become a knight of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you spend a night in the church. They would baptize you then. And the soldiers, these crusaders, 1,000 years ago, would carve these crosses in the marble column on their way out. They tell stories about these baptisms. They would immerse these soldiers. They would take them down under the water. You've participated in this. You've seen this happen. Except their sword arm, they'd hold up out of the water. Why? Well, Jesus, you can be Lord of my life, everything except my warrior prowess. I'm in control of that. Your life is on loan from God. All of it. He wants all of it. What are you holding up out of the water? Your time, your possessions, your pocketbook. What is it that you have not yet given over to the Lordship of Jesus Christ because he wants it all? My life is not my own. I was bought with a price. Therefore, I'm called to honor God with all of it and let him use it as a lever to bring more people to him. Would you stand up with me? I want to pray, and then we're going to respond. Jesus.